Welcome to another Office Revenge Hub. Sit back and enjoy the story.
I walked into the office on a Tuesday morning and was fired without a reason. No warning, no explanation, just a security escort to the door. And what I built next made them regret ever letting me go. My name is Daniel Cross, and for 8 years I was the operations manager at Titanium Logistics, a mid-sized freight company in Atlanta. I wasn't just an employee. I was the person who made things work when they fell apart. I was the one they called at 2 a.m. when a shipment was delayed. I was the one who solved problems nobody else could solve. Titanium moved freight across the Southeast. We had about 60 employees, a fleet of 40 trucks, and contracts with manufacturers who needed reliable transportation. When I started, the company was chaotic. Drivers were constantly lost, shipments were late, clients were furious. But the previous operations manager had quit after 6 months, overwhelmed by the complexity. I fixed everything. I implemented tracking systems, optimized routes, built relationships with drivers, and turned angry clients into loyal partners. Within my first year, our on-time delivery rate went from 62% to 94%. Client retention improved, revenue grew. My days started at 5 a.m. I'd review the previous night's deliveries, check for any issues, coordinate with drivers starting their routes. By 6, I was in the office handling logistics software, updating shipment schedules, managing dispatch, meetings with clients, calls with vendors, problem solving all day, every day. The owner was a man named Richard Bowman, mid-50s, now former truck driver who'd built the company from a single vehicle 20 years earlier. He was gruff, difficult to read, but I thought we had mutual respect. Every quarterly review, he'd tell me I was essential to the operation. Every time we landed a new contract, he'd credit my systems and planning. I worked through weekends. I cancelled vacations when emergencies came up. I trained new dispatchers, mentored junior staff, and took responsibility for mistakes that weren't even mine. My girlfriend Lauren complained that I prioritized work over our relationship, and she was right. But I believed the sacrifice would pay off. Richard had mentioned profit sharing. He'd hinted at making me a partner eventually. I trusted that loyalty mattered. The firing happened on a Tuesday in September. No warning signs, no tension the day before, and I walked in at my usual time, checked the dispatch board, poured coffee in the break room. Richard's assistant found me there. "Daniel, Richard needs to see you in his office right now." Her tone was strange, formal, uncomfortable. I followed her upstairs. Richard was sitting at his desk with Helen from HR, a woman I'd barely interacted with in 8 years. There was a file folder in front of him and 2 other people I didn't recognize, a man and a woman in business suits. Richard didn't look at me. "Daniel, we're terminating your employment effective immediately." The words didn't make sense. I stood there waiting for the punchline, the explanation, something that would make this make sense. "I don't understand. Did I do something wrong?" This is not a conversation. We're exercising our right to terminate at-will employment. Helen has your final paycheck and COBRA information. But why? After 8 years, I deserve to know why. The man in the suit spoke up. "Mr. Cross, Georgia is an at-will employment state. The company is not required to provide a reason for termination. Please collect your personal belongings. Security will escort you out." I looked at Richard, the man who'd called me essential, the man who'd promised partnership. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. "Richard, talk to me. What happened? Just tell me what I did wrong." "This meeting is over." His voice was flat, final. Helen handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for 2 weeks severance and paperwork about continuing my health insurance at my own expense. A security guard I'd known for 5 years appeared at the door. "Come on, Daniel. Let's get your stuff." The walk to my desk was surreal. People stared. Some looked shocked. Others looked away quickly. Nobody said anything. The security guard stood 3 feet from me while I packed 8 years into a cardboard box. Pictures of Lauren, a coffee mug that said world's okayest manager that my team had given me as a joke. Industry awards, my personal notebooks full of route optimizations and process improvements. 20 minutes later, I was in the parking lot. Fired, no explanation, no reason, just gone. I sat in my car for an hour staring at the building. My phone started buzzing. Texts from co-workers. What happened? Are you okay? They just announced you're no longer with the company. I didn't know how to respond. I drove home in a daze. Lauren was at work. I sat in our apartment, surrounded by silence, trying to process what had just happened. I replayed every recent interaction with Richard. Had I missed something? Had I made a mistake I wasn't aware of? Had someone complained about me? Nothing made sense. My last performance review 3 months earlier had been excellent. I'd just successfully negotiated a major contract with a manufacturing client. The operation was running smoothly. There was no logical reason to fire me, unless there was a reason they couldn't tell me, or wouldn't. When Lauren came home that evening, I was still sitting on the couch, surrounded by the contents of my desk box. "Daniel, what are you doing home? Are you sick?" "I got fired." She froze. "What? Why?" "They wouldn't say. Richard just terminated me, no explanation." Lauren sat next to me. "That's illegal. They have to give you a reason." "Georgia is at will. They don't have to tell me anything." "Did you do something wrong?" The question stung, even though I knew she was just trying to understand. "No, I don't think so. I genuinely have no idea what happened." Over the next few days, I tried to get answers. I called Richard directly. He wouldn't take my calls. I emailed him, no response. I reached out to co-workers who I thought were friends. Most stopped responding. A few sent vague messages about company changes and restructuring. One person was honest with me, Marcos, a dispatcher I'd hired and trained. He called me 3 days after the firing. "Daniel, I don't know what's going on, but something's not right. The day you were fired, Richard had a meeting with everyone. He told us you'd been let go for performance issues and that we weren't to discuss you or contact you." "Performance issues? That's a lie." "I know, everyone knows. Your metrics were excellent. But Richard was adamant. He said anyone who contacted you would face disciplinary action." "Did he say anything else?" Marcus hesitated. "There's a new operations manager starting Monday, a guy named Brett Chambers. Apparently he's Richard's nephew." Everything clicked into place. I'd been replaced by family. Richard had lied about the reason to avoid admitting nepotism. The vague at-will termination protected him legally while destroying my professional reputation. I called an employment lawyer. Her name was Patricia Mills, and she listened to my story carefully. "Do you have any evidence of discrimination? Age, race, religion, disability?" "No, I'm 34, white, no disabilities." "Any written employment contract?" "No, everything was at will." "Any documentation of promised partnership or profit sharing?" "Just verbal conversations." Patricia sighed. Georgia at-will employment law is heavily weighted toward employers. Without evidence of discrimination or a breach of written contract, you don't have a viable wrongful termination case. They can fire you for no reason or even a bad reason, as long as it's not an illegal reason. "So I have no recourse?" "You could try filing an unemployment claim. Beyond that, your best option is to find new employment and move forward." I filed for unemployment. Titanium contested it, claiming I was terminated for cause related to performance issues. I had to appeal, provide documentation of my actual performance, and wait 6 weeks for a hearing. Eventually, I won the appeal. but the process was humiliating and exhausting. Money became the immediate crisis. I'd been making $78,000 a year. Our rent was $1,500 a month. Car payment, insurance, utilities, groceries. Lauren made decent money as a dental hygienist, but not enough to cover everything alone. I applied for jobs immediately. Operations manager positions at logistics companies, supply chain roles, transportation coordinator jobs. I had excellent experience, strong metrics, industry connections. But something was wrong. I'd get phone interviews. They'd sound interested. Then they'd go silent after checking references. I finally figured out what was happening when a recruiter was honest with me. Daniel, now I'm going to level with you. I called Titanium Logistics to verify your employment. They confirmed your dates and title. But when I asked if they'd rehire you, they said no. When I asked about your performance, they said there were issues toward the end of your tenure that led to your termination. That's not true. I was their top performer. Maybe, but I have other candidates without complications. I can't take the risk. Richard was sabotaging me. He couldn't give me a bad reference legally. That could be defamation, but he could imply problems without specifics. It was just enough to make employers hesitant. By November, I'd been unemployed for 2 months. I'd applied to 63 positions. I'd gotten 12 interviews, 0 offers. Our savings were disappearing. I'd stopped going out with friends, and I was eating pasta and rice to save money on groceries. Lauren was stressed, picking up extra shifts at work. We were fighting more. The tension was destroying us. I started waking up at 3 a.m. with panic attacks, shortness of breath, racing heart, overwhelming fear. I'd lie in bed calculating how many months until we were completely broke. The number kept shrinking. I applied for jobs outside logistics, warehouse supervisor, delivery coordinator, anything that used my skills. The pay was lower, but I was desperate. Still nothing. By December, I was applying to retail management positions, store supervisor at big box retailers, shift manager at restaurants, jobs that paid $40,000 a year, nearly half what I'd been making. I got an interview at a hardware store for assistant manager. The hiring manager was a kid who looked 23. He asked me why I wanted to work there. I gave him some answer about customer service and operational excellence. He offered me the job at $16 an hour. I took it. I had no choice. Working retail after 8 years managing complex logistics operations was soul-crushing. I was stocking shelves, helping customers find paint supplies, running cash registers. My boss was young enough to be my younger brother and had half my professional experience. The job was 40 hours a week. It paid just enough to cover bills if Lauren and I split everything carefully. There was no career path, no growth, no future. I'd come home exhausted and demoralized. Lauren would ask how work was, and I couldn't answer honestly because admitting how far I'd fallen was too painful. She tried to be supportive. It's temporary, you'll find something better. But weeks turned into months. I was still applying for logistics jobs, still getting nowhere. The hardware store job became my reality. I started wondering if this was it, if my career was over at 34, if I'd spend the rest of my professional life in retail because Richard Bowman had decided his nephew deserved my job. The self-doubt was worse than the financial struggle. I'd spent 8 years building expertise, solving complex problems, managing people and systems. And now I was helping suburban dads choose between different grades of sandpaper. I felt worthless, disposable, like those 8 years of dedication had meant nothing. Lauren noticed I was deteriorating. You need to talk to someone. A therapist? I can't afford therapy. There are community resources, sliding scale clinics. Daniel, you're depressed. I'm worried about you. She was right. I found a counselor through a community health center who charged based on income. His name was Dr. Raymond Park, and our first session I broke down completely. I told him everything. The firing, the confusion, the unemployment, the retail job, the feeling that I'd failed. You didn't fail, he said. You were failed. There's a difference. What difference does that make? The outcome is the same. The outcome is temporary. How you respond to it determines what happens next. I didn't believe him then, but he kept asking me questions that forced me to think differently. What did you learn in those 8 years? What problems did you solve that nobody else could solve? What would you do if you could start over knowing what you know now? The turning point came on a Sunday in February. I was at the hardware store, working a weekend shift, when a customer came in with a complicated delivery logistics question. He ran a small construction company and was frustrated with his current freight provider. Shipments were late. Communication was poor. He needed reliability. I spent 20 minutes talking him through solutions, route optimization strategies, communication protocols, vendor management. I wasn't selling him anything from the store. I was just helping him solve a problem because I knew how. He looked at me strangely. You really know this stuff. What are you doing working here? Long story. I'm serious. I need someone who understands logistics. My current setup is costing me thousands in delays. Would you be interested in consulting? I can't afford to hire someone full-time, but I'd pay for expertise. I gave him my number. He called 2 days later and offered me $500 to audit his shipping operation and provide recommendations. $500 for maybe 8 hours of work. More than I made in a week at the hardware store. I did the audit on my day off. I reviewed his contracts, analyzed his shipping patterns, identified inefficiencies, and wrote a detailed report with actionable recommendations. He was thrilled. This is exactly what I needed. Do you do this professionally? Not yet, but I could. That conversation planted a seed. What if I didn't need another job? What if I created one? I spent the next 2 weeks researching logistics consulting, supply chain optimization, small to mid-sized companies that couldn't afford full-time operations staff but needed expertise. The barrier to entry was low. I needed a business license, liability insurance, and a website. Total startup cost was maybe $1,500. I had that much left in savings. I talked to Lauren about it. This could work or it could fail completely, but I need to try. I can't keep stocking shelves and wondering what if. Then try. I believe in you, even if you don't believe in yourself right now. I registered an LLC in March, Cross Logistics Consulting. I built a basic website over a weekend, showcasing my experience and the results I'd achieved at Titanium. I couldn't use specific client names without permission, but I could describe the work. On-time delivery improvement from 62 to 94%, cost reduction through route optimization, system implementation. Then I started reaching out, not to huge corporations, but to small companies, construction firms, manufacturing operations, distributors, businesses that were too small for enterprise solutions, but too complex for simple answers. My first pitch was to a roofing supply company. The owner was drowning in logistics problems. Late deliveries were costing him contracts. I offered a free initial consultation. We met at his warehouse. I spent 2 hours analyzing his operation, asking questions, observing workflows. Then I outlined 3 major problems and potential solutions. How much would this cost? He asked. I'd prepared rates. $200 an hour for consulting, fixed price projects for implementations, retainer options for ongoing support. Let's start with a pilot. Give me 2 weeks to fix your routing system. If it works, we continue. If it doesn't, you pay me nothing. He agreed. I spent those 2 weeks building a custom routing solution using software I knew from my Titanium days. I trained his dispatchers, optimized delivery windows, and created documentation. Within a week, his late deliveries dropped by 40%. Within 2 weeks, they were down 60%. He signed a retainer agreement for ongoing consulting at $4,000 a month. One client, $4,000 a month. It was just over half what I'd been making at Titanium, but it was mine. I quit the hardware store. My boss looked relieved. I'd been overqualified and miserable, and everyone knew it. I started working full-time on cross-logistics consulting. I reached out to every small business owner I'd ever met. I offered free audits. I provided value before asking for payment. I focused on solving real problems with measurable results. By May, I had 3 retainer clients. Monthly revenue was approaching $10,000. After taxes and expenses, I was netting close to what I'd made at Titanium. But more importantly, I was building something nobody could take away. Word spread in Atlanta's small business community. A warehouse manager I'd worked with at Titanium had moved to a different company. He reached out in June. "Daniel, I heard you're doing consulting now. We're having serious logistics problems. Mike, can you help?" His company was a medical supply distributor. They had contracts with hospitals and clinics across Georgia. Their delivery reliability was terrible. Patients were affected. The company was at risk of losing contracts. I did a comprehensive audit. Their problems were systemic. Poor routing, no tracking, inadequate driver training, outdated software. I presented a proposal. Complete logistics overhaul, 3 months of intensive work. Fixed price of $45,000. They accepted. It was more money than I'd made in 6 months at Titanium. I worked harder on that project than I'd worked on anything. 18-hour days, weekends, complete focus. I implemented new software, retrained staff, redesigned routes, and built accountability systems. By the end of 3 months, with their on-time delivery rate had gone from 58% to 91%. Client complaints dropped by 73%. They saved over $100,000 in the first year through efficiency improvements. They gave me a testimonial that became the cornerstone of my marketing. More importantly, they referred me to 3 other medical supply companies. By September, 1 year after being fired from Titanium, I had 12 clients. Monthly revenue was $43,000. I'd hired my first employee, a young logistics coordinator named Sarah, who reminded me of myself 8 years earlier. Hungry, talented, eager to learn. I paid her well. I treated her with respect. I gave her interesting projects and real responsibility. The business continued growing. I wasn't trying to compete with Titanium. I was serving a completely different market. Companies too small for the big logistics firms, but too complex for basic solutions. Then I started hearing things through industry contacts, through former Titanium colleagues who'd stayed in touch despite Richard's warnings. Titanium was struggling. Brett Chambers, Richard's nephew, was incompetent. On-time deliveries had dropped. Clients were complaining. Several major contracts were lost. The systems I'd built had degraded without someone who understood them. The relationships I'd maintained with drivers had deteriorated under Brett's poor management. The company was hemorrhaging money. In December, I got a call from one of Titanium's former clients, a manufacturing company called Apex Industrial. I'd managed their account for 5 years. "Daniel, I don't know if you remember me. I'm John Hastings, VP of Operations at Apex." "Of course I remember. How are you?" "Frustrated. Titanium has been a disaster since you left. We're looking for a new logistics provider. I heard you started a consulting firm. Can you handle our volume?" Apex shipped about 400 loads a month. It was more than cross-logistics consulting could handle alone. But I had relationships with reliable freight carriers from my Titanium days. I can't move freight directly, but I can coordinate everything. I'll find you carriers, manage relationships, optimize routes, handle logistics. You'll get the same level of service you had when I was at Titanium, probably better. What's your rate? I calculated quickly. $15,000 a month retainer. Yeah, plus I'll negotiate competitive carrier rates that'll save you at least 20% compared to what you're paying now. We signed the contract in January. Apex was my largest client. More importantly, they were Titanium's second largest account. Losing them would hurt Richard significantly. 2 more former Titanium clients reached out over the next 3 months. Both had similar stories. Service had degraded. Brett was incompetent. They needed reliable logistics support. I signed them both. By April, 2 years after being fired, I'd taken 3 of Titanium's major clients. My annual revenue was over $600,000. I had 4 employees. We'd moved from my apartment to a small office in Midtown. I wasn't trying to destroy Richard's business. I was just doing good work, and his former clients recognized that. But the impact on Titanium was significant. I heard through industry channels that they were downsizing. They'd sold off part of their truck fleet. Staff had been laid off. Richard had to know I was taking his clients, but he never contacted me. Pride, probably, or shame. The confrontation I'd imagined, the dramatic moment where I'd tell him exactly what I thought of him, never happened. Instead, I just kept building. Lauren and I got engaged in May. She'd stuck with me through the worst period of my life, never wavering, always believing I'd figure it out. The ring was modest but meaningful, bought with money I'd earned building something that mattered. We moved into a better apartment. Not extravagant, just nicer. A place that felt like progress. The business kept growing. I hired a second coordinator, then a third. We developed proprietary routing software. We built a reputation for solving complex logistics problems that other consultants couldn't handle. By the 3rd year, Cross Logistics Consulting was doing nearly $1 million in annual revenue. We had 8 employees. We'd been featured in a regional business publication as one of Atlanta's fastest growing small businesses. I ran into Richard at an industry conference in November, 3 years after he'd fired me without explanation. He looked older, worn down. The confidence I'd always associated with him was gone. We made eye contact across the exhibition hall. For a moment I thought he'd walk away. Instead, he approached. "Daniel." "Richard." Awkward silence. Then he said, "I heard you're doing well, your consulting business." "I am. How's Titanium?" "Challenging. The market's changed. Competition's increased." "I heard you lost the Apex contract." His jaw tightened. "You took it." "They came to me. I gave them better service than they were getting. That's not personal. That's business." "You took 3 of my clients." "Your former clients. They left because service declined after I was gone. That's on you, not me." Richard looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew I was right. "Why did you fire me?" I asked. After 3 years, I'd still like to know. He hesitated. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed. "Brett needed a job, and my sister had been pressuring me for years to bring him into the business. I couldn't afford both of you. I chose family." "You could have been honest. You could have offered me a severance package, helped me transition. Instead, you lied about performance issues and sabotaged my references. I was protecting the company from a wrongful termination lawsuit. By destroying my reputation, by making it impossible for me to find work, I did what I thought was necessary." I looked at him, this man I'd respected, worked for, sacrificed for, and felt nothing, no anger, no satisfaction, just emptiness. "How's Brett working out?" I asked. Richard's expression answered before his words did. "He's learning." "After 3 years?" "It's more complicated than I realized. What you did, the systems you built, I didn't understand how much you were managing until you were gone. And now I'm trying to rebuild with someone who doesn't have your experience or your instincts. It's not going well." There it was, the admission I'd once desperately wanted to hear, the acknowledgement that firing me was a mistake. But it felt hollow. I didn't need his validation anymore. I'd built something better without him. "Richard, I appreciate your honesty, but I don't need an apology or an explanation anymore. You made a choice. I made the best of it. We're both living with the consequences. Would you ever consider coming back? I could make room for you. Brett could work in a different capacity." The question stunned me. After everything he was asking me to return. No? I'd pay you significantly more than before. Partnership, equity stake. No. Why not? No, because you taught me something valuable. You showed me that loyalty to someone else's company is never rewarded the way you expect. You showed me that I'm capable of building something that's actually mine. No, you gave me the motivation to create a business where I control my own future. So thank you, but no. I walked away from that conversation feeling lighter than I had in years. Cross Logistics Consulting continued thriving. We expanded into new markets. We developed additional services. We built a reputation that went beyond Atlanta. I hired several people who'd been laid off from Titanium during Richard's downsizing. They understood logistics, and they appreciated a workplace that valued competence over nepotism. 4 years after being fired, I learned that Titanium Logistics was being acquired by a larger regional freight company. Richard was retiring as part of the deal. Brett was being let go in the restructuring. I felt no satisfaction in their failure, just a quiet recognition that I'd made the right choice in building something separate from them. Sarah, my first hire, became operations director. I promoted her aggressively, gave her equity, treated her like the valuable asset she was. She grew into an incredible leader. Lauren and I got married in a small ceremony in the mountains. Standing at the altar, I thought about that Tuesday morning 4 years earlier, when I'd been escorted out of Titanium's building with a cardboard box of belongings. If someone had told me then what would come next, I wouldn't have believed them. The struggle, the retail job, the panic attacks, the slow, difficult rebuild, but also the growth, the company, the team, the future I'd created from nothing, the revenge I'd imagined in those early months, public confrontation, dramatic ruin, Richard begging for forgiveness had never materialized. Instead, I'd achieved something quieter and more meaningful. I'd proven that being fired wasn't the end. It was redirection. 5 years after being fired, Cross Logistics Consulting employed 23 people and generated over $2 million in annual revenue. We'd outgrown Titanium at its peak. We were serving clients across the Southeast. We'd won industry awards for innovation in supply chain management. I still work long hours. I still solve complex problems. I still manage systems and people. But now it's for something I own, something I built, something that reflects my values. The best revenge isn't destruction, it's creation. It's building something so successful that the people who dismissed you can't help but notice. It's proving that their decision to let you go was their loss, not yours. Richard tried to protect his company by firing me. Instead, he created his biggest competitor. He tried to help his nephew by giving him my job. Instead, he destroyed the systems that made his company successful. He tried to sabotage my future. Instead, he forced me to build a better one. I don't think about Richard often anymore. When I do, it's without anger or bitterness. He was a flawed man who made a selfish decision. That decision hurt me temporarily, but redirected my entire career towards something better. The Daniel who was fired that Tuesday morning was dependent on someone else's approval, someone else's company, someone else's definition of success. The Daniel I am now answers only to himself, his team, and the clients who choose to work with him. Yeah, that transformation didn't happen through revenge. It happened through work, persistence, and refusing to accept someone else's assessment of my worth. If you've ever been betrayed at work, you're not alone. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe to Office Revenge Hub for more powerful workplace revenge stories.